Standing up for the national anthem is now white nationalism. The irony is there actually was racial demagoguery in this campaign, a lot of it, but it didn't come from Ed Gellespie or his supporters. In the closing days, supporters of Northam ran an ad suggesting that Ed Gellespie's voters wanted to murder minority kids. That's not a partisan interpretation of it. The ad actually said that. It showed a white man in a pickup truck with a Gellespie sticker trying to run over a bunch of kids, including a little Muslim girl, as they fled for their lives. The New York Times didn't even mention that ad until graph 14 of its hit piece on Gellespie yesterday. The ad got in the way of their storyline, apparently. Like all off-year elections, tomorrow's results will be scrutinized for larger lessons about American politics. You're going to hear people say the vote was a referendum on Trump, and to some extent that's true, it was. But it will also be a test of the Democratic Party's worst and most dangerous habit, inflaming racial fears to get voters to the polls. Does that tactic still work? Let's hope not. We'll find out tomorrow. Juan Williams co-hosts The Five right here on Fox, and he joins us tonight. Hey, Juan.
Hey, how are you, Tucker?
So, you know Ed Gellespie. Everyone in Washington knows Ed Gellespie. And whatever you think of his politics, he's hardly a bigot. He's a moderate guy politically and by temperament. And so I just look at this with my jaw open and think, if they're turning Ed Gellespie into a bigot for attacking MS-13, then, like, the word has no meaning anymore. That's my reaction to it.
Well, you know, I like Ed Gellespie a lot. I knew him when he was chair of the Republican National Committee, and he was always a guy about inclusion and outreach to minorities. He saw that as the future of the party. But I must say that I was listening to you, I was thinking to myself, I think Ed has found himself in a tight spot after a primary race in which he was running against Corey Stewart, who was Donald Trump's campaign manager in Virginia. And Stewart ran a campaign that was all about the Confederate statues and keeping them in place. He made a very strong populist and at times racial appeal that brought him almost, I think it was less than 2 points, with close to Ed Gellespie in that primary race for the nomination. And now Ed has done things like what you have just laid out, the NFL players kneeling, the Confederate statues, and I think most of all, somehow conflating MS-13 with immigration, and started those ads in the southwestern part of the state, you know, down in Roanoke and the more rural
I don't
area.
understand what you mean. I mean, I guess I would just make 2 points. One, MS-13 is a real thing. It's an actual phenomenon.
It's not the state.
Well,
it's not as big a threat as you would think by seeing the commercials.
Do you know who it's a threat to, though? Is Salvadoran immigrants.
I agree with
all the way
you.
to El Salvador to report on this.
That's fine, but that's not who the ads are aimed at. The ads are stirring up white anger.
But you don't need to be white to be angry about the fact that our immigration policy has allowed a lot of people to come here illegally and join street gangs.
I agree with you.
So there's nothing, and by the way, their victims are immigrants. So, like, I don't know, why is that racist to say that? It's true.
No. It's not. You're right. There's a real issue, especially, I mean, these people kill each other, so they're Salvadorans killing Salvadorans. But it ties into, and this goes back to the Trump playbook, which is immigration is a threat. It's perceived as a threat by lots of working-class white voters. I think you've spoken to me about this. And so what it does is, by playing this up in an ad, it stirs that base that wasn't going to go to the Ed Gellespie you described as a moderate Republican.
Well, look, I disagree with Ed Gellespie's views on immigration very strongly.
Okay.
So, but because I'm way to the right of him on immigration, because it actually is a threat. It's a great thing in other ways, but in some ways it is a threat, and MS-13 is one manifestation of that. It's real, and there's nothing racist about saying that. And if we make that off limits, if we call people names for telling the truth, then we can't have an honest conversation about it.
Oh, no, I want an honest conversation, but I'm telling you, it's not a threat to the extent that it would become the major issue in the race for governor of Virginia, unless you are playing it in order to stir up and turn out your voters, which is what Ed has done.
Okay,
he is following the Corey Stewart, Donald Trump playbook.
They ran an ad, his opponents, accusing him and his voters of wanting to murder children with a pickup truck. No, that's literally true, and that's not like my spin on it. I mean, that's what, have you seen the spot? Of course.
Of course.
And yet somehow Ed Gellespie, who is a victim of that ad, he's the bigot for some reason because he doesn't like MS-13. Do you see why this is actually insane? And it's making people vote for Ed Gellespie. The attacks on Gellespie are so unfair that I think a lot of people who wouldn't vote for Gellespie are thinking, you know what, this is nutty, and I'm voting for Gellespie to show that I don't like it.
No, I think the dynamic, the political dynamic, is one that Steve Bannon, you know, the Trump political advisor of old now, said, you know, this is the playbook. This is how Ed Gellespie has gotten himself back in the race by highlighting things like MS-13 and immigration.
Hold on.
It is a political play to a racial base, Tucker.
But they accused him of wanting to murder minority children. I mean, if that's not racial demagoguery, is that not racial demagoguery? I mean, like, what's the definition of it if that isn't?
Let me just tell you, this is not racial demagoguery. When you go into Latino communities and Muslim communities and see the anxiety that has been stirred by the kind of appeals that came from Trump, and now Corey Stewart.
Not by this ad saying actually they want to murder your children with a pickup truck. That doesn't heighten anxiety, though.
It's a nightmare of anxiety that's depicted in the
so they'll
ad.
vote for us. I get it.
Well,
people should be ashamed of that. I think that ad.
I think playing racial politics is unnecessary, but I don't think you can deny that that's what's going on in this campaign.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I just think, you know what I think. Juan, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure, Tucker.